What's up, everyone? Andrew Foltz here with episode number 2 of the F the Lines podcast, a show where we talk about creativity, focus, happiness, and how to start a business that doesn't eat you alive. Today, I'm teaming up with marketing firestarter Kathy Palikoff to see what we can do to reinvent something that honestly sucks: networking events. We dive into the problems with networking, brainstorm solutions, and talk about some actionable steps you can take to start a networking event or just get more out of the ones you're already going to. It's a fun episode, and I think you're going to enjoy it, so let's get to it. All right, so, I enjoyed our first podcast, but I think that instead of a guest, I just want to make you a co-host.
Ooh.
Yeah. So
what about the cat? Does the cat get to be a co-host too?
The cat can get a credit, but that is as far as I'm willing to go because, I'm just not a fan of hairballs. And you know what else I'm not a fan of is networking events. So today I would just love to completely dismantle the networking event and figure out what sucks about it, what we can improve, and maybe some ways that we can figure out how to make that happen. So let's just start off by talking about what sucks about the networking event.
Everything?
So let's talk about maybe like either the last networking event you went to or maybe one that you kind of sticks out to you in terms of really just not enjoying it.
So in general, I don't enjoy networking events for a variety of reasons. And I usually stay as close to the door as possible to get out or as close to the alcohol as possible to ease the pain.
Yes.
And that. So, if I can situate myself, alcohol, door, food, I'm okay. It's the people. And it's the purpose. So there's this, they don't feel authentic to me.
Right.
So I actually like human beings. How about you? You don't like human beings.
I actually, it's funny. I think that I had this belief that I don't like people, and I'm coming to find that I think that people are both my greatest weakness and my greatest strength. I work at a running store, and when I started working there, I was terrified of people, and I thought that I was an introvert. And then over time, I realized that I'm not. I'm kind of like whatever I want to be. So I just started, practicing and started asking people more interesting questions. And once I did that, I started to have fun, and you start to learn more things about people. But there is this difficulty of like, how do you cross that bridge? I mean, so whenever I show up to a networking event, it's like the awkwardness that really gets me. Like, I don't know what to do, and most of the people there are kind of segmented out into little groups like it's high school all over again. And I think maybe what it's missing is this feeling of like college, where you go to college for the first time and there's no social groups. I mean, people kind of like click up really fast, but there's this beginning part where you can just meet absolutely anyone. And I think that that's maybe like the number one thing that's wrong with networking events. And maybe just like, I don't know what to do when I get there. Like there's no plan. There's just a bunch of people who I don't know, most of whom are already talking to each other, and I don't know what to do with that.
So I know we're still talking about the problem, but several years ago, a woman who I greatly admire, her name is Kathleen Pringle, she said the statement, and it was the first time I had heard it, was, your network is your net worth.
Yeah.
And I went, ooh. And she was brilliant at networking events. I mean, and still is. She looked at peace, comfortable, etc. But in what she does is she is an executive coach and a career advisor. She just has this really pleasant manner about her. So she and I came up with a methodology to take the mystery out of networking events, and it was called
cool.
Host, because what I realized was that I actually like throwing parties.
Mm,
I like inviting people into my house and feeding them. I enjoy all that part. But when you put me in an outside situation where A, I don't have control over it, B, I don't know how to do it. Like when you were talking about high school, it brings back all that anxiety. Like,
yeah.
how do I insert myself into this group of people and not sound stupid?
Right.
What is the first statement I make? Oh, I don't really look like them because I'm not. I mean, I don't wear high heels. I don't
Sure.
have all those things. So, am I fitting in? Okay, maybe I'll just be funny. Oh, that joke didn't work. So I go through all that stuff. So, what a host did, which was really interesting, is it said the strategy is that you become the host of the event.
Mm.
So you go
Oh,
in
so even
there,
if you're not the host,
you go
okay.
in and act like a host. So your purpose is really to make people feel comfortable. So as opposed to, because I think the falseness of a networking event is that there's an agenda, like you're supposed to make all these contacts who then will turn into business for you or will be advocates for a cause you care about or stuff like that. So there's this agenda. When you go to someone's house for a party or you're at that college mixer, it's like about having fun,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So you deflate the fun out of it, then you put it all into other people's control, and then what you learn are these weird tricks like here are 10 opening lines, or
Yeah.
wear a suit jacket so you can put the cards in one pocket or and then the other ones in the other pocket. Go off to a corner and discreetly write down what you talked about with that person so you can follow. I mean, there's books and books and books with all
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it doesn't feel like it's real. It just doesn't feel real
Yeah,
at
so
all.
I mean, I don't want to spend too long talking about the problem, but maybe let me add one more thing, and if you have any other problems to add, we can do that. And that's that I think that there's kind of like a lack of focus, and maybe a lack of interactivity. So I don't remember what it was, but one time we went to, I mean, a lot of times when we've gone to networking events, there's kind of like one person talking, and it's like they're not really um, they're not it's not really interesting because they're just sort of like talking at people, and then they wait till the very end to have questions, so there's not really a very interesting dialogue going on. And I think a lot of people aren't great public speakers either because they don't have practice, or they just don't like it. So I think that maybe one thing that can make networking events better if they have some sort of presenter is kind of breaking it up a little bit more where people can ask questions more often and kind of like have a conversation as opposed to just having someone presenting who probably doesn't even want to present. Um, Anything else you have to add in terms of problems?
Well, I think one of the fundamental problems is with the name.
Mm,
Networking. What does that mean? I mean, you're immediately working. What are you netting? I
yeah.
mean, so why not change the name of them? So I think that's one problem. And I also think that generally you don't know who's going to be there.
Right.
So like selecting, like say you really want to use networking as a business development tool, which is generally what a lot of people use it for.
Sure.
It's really useful to know ahead of time who's going to be at that event so you can can uh, develop a strategy for
And like
who you
someone,
want to
something
meet.
about them so you know who they are versus
Yeah,
just a
yeah.
face.
So you can like do the research before and say, "Oh, I was stalking you on Facebook the other day and I saw that you went to Iceland. How cool."
Right. Yeah.
I mean, that you could have that kind of conversation, but you don't really know who's going to be in the room. So it's not like a real thing,
Yeah.
you know?
Okay, so just to sum up, some of the things that are problems, it's awkward, it feels really forced. Sometimes the speakers don't really want to be speaking, and maybe they would rather be engaging in a conversation. You don't know who's going to be there, so that's kind of uncomfortable. And then you don't even know whether you should go because is this going to be worth it? Maybe there just aren't people there who you could really connect with. So those are some of the problems.
I need to add one more
Yeah,
though,
okay.
okay? Because this one is critical, and you and I are a little bit different in that, I'm old, you're not. But I think lots of people have this problem, and it has to do with location. Okay, so many of these events are in bars or in a location where the acoustics are horrible. So
Right.
you're sitting there sort of trying to lip read.
Yeah.
You don't really get all the conversation. You're sitting there nodding your head a lot,
Yeah.
and stuff like it. It makes you sort of want to take up smoking so you can go outside
Yeah.
and actually
True.
have a real conversation
Yeah.
that you can hear.
Right.
So I think the acoustics on these things are just insane. I mean, imagine going to your bedroom and having that loud of amount of noise and wanting to have a real conversation with your sweetheart.
Sure.
It wouldn't work.
Yeah.
So the noise, and particularly as restaurants have these really high ceilings,
Yeah.
acoustically, man. I mean, I've been to multiple events where I've left because of that. Do you have that problem?
I do. Yeah. I mean, I don't. I think it's a hearing problem. It could be a hearing problem, but it could also just be a focus problem. I mean, some people, like I tend to zoom in on really tiny details. So when I'm in a place with a million details, it's really hard for me to focus. So I do have that problem. So I think we've got a really good meaty list of things that really suck about networking. And let me just kind of circle back to your idea about how powerful networking is, because I think a lot of people really hate it, but I think that networking has a lot of potential. And I was watching this video. Do you know Jordan Peterson?
Nope.
He's a psychologist. He's sort of kind of a radical type of person, and has a lot of radical views. But I was watching this video and he was talking about how, I'm not sure if this is his idea or someone else's idea, but that if you do a little bit of arithmetic, it becomes clear very quickly how powerful your network is, because you know 1,000 people, and pretty much everyone you know knows 1,000 people. So every time you meet someone, that's the possibility of connecting a million different people, which is kind of insane to think about. And then if you're talking about three people connecting, or three levels of connection there, that's a billion people. So you can possibly connect to a billion people just by having three levels of connection, which is kind of fascinating. So with that in mind, let's kind of transition to like how could we actually make the networking event not suck? That's the creative brief. So what's an idea that you have to make it not suck?
Well, I think that it breaks into different categories. So one category is the networking event doesn't change, but your attitude changes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's the idea, for example, of like host, where you go in and it's not about you, but your intention is to go and make other people comfortable. So you go seek out deliberately the person who isn't surrounded by a group of person
Right.
of that. So you act
And
like,
there's always those people.
and so you act with kindness.
Yeah.
And that, I think another attitudinal thing is that you embrace randomness. So the best things that have always come out of networking for me were unexpected. It's like going on a trip and going down the wrong road and having an adventure. So that, but if your purpose is not as focused as I want to meet George, because you can meet George in other ways,
Right.
right? But if your purpose is to expand your mind and the people in it, and go on an adventure with these people, then it becomes like fun. It goes back to you talking about how you're now liking human beings.
Yeah.
Because you're listening to their cool stories and their cool ideas, and then you're enjoying it. So for me, a lot of it is an attitudinal way of approaching it versus when can I leave and how drunk can I get. So, how
Yeah, I
about
think I
yourself?
well, I think that's really interesting that you said that because now it occurs to me that we've kind of got two solutions. One solution that you've really started with is not just like how do you reinvent the networking event, but how do you reinvent yourself going into a networking event that hasn't been reinvented? Because I think that's probably what a lot of people are going to have to do because I mean you can start your own networking event, which we've kind of talked about maybe would be interesting, but um, that takes work and it takes time, and maybe you want to start going out connecting before that. And then one other thing to add to the idea of reinventing yourself going to the traditional networking event that I found is like when I'm working at running store, sometimes I feel like I get stuck and I don't know what questions to ask. And before, I would sort of just go into this like passive state where I assume that this conversation is boring and I can't think of anything interesting to ask. But the funny thing is that just asking any question can lead you somewhere. And if you listen, if you really listen to the answer, you can always find something interesting to go off on that. Like, I was working with a customer the other day, and he was sort of reserved. And before, I would have assumed that he wasn't interesting at all. I would have assumed that it was boring, and it would have led to a boring conversation. But even though it was cliche, I was just like, what do you do for a living? What are you working on right now? And he said, oh, I'm a software engineer. And then that led to this whole conversation about me being a web developer and talking about coding and just all this stuff. It led from a really boring question. So I think a lot of people put a lot of pressure on themselves to try to be interesting. And sometimes you just have to just ask the questions and see what happens. And I think that it's kind of a matter of like faith. I mean, I'm an atheist, so I had a problem with faith for a long time because I like to reason everything out and be able to see a clear path. But sometimes you just have to like take those leaps and see what happens. And the cool thing is that something always happens. Something always comes out of something, even if it's the most boring thing in the world. You just have to kind of listen for it. So I think that's kind of cool in terms of how we could actually change networking events instead of just ourselves. I think one cool thing would be to have some kind of space that was set aside for people to kind of like retreat to and just chill. Maybe it's like a writing space or someplace where they could like draw or something like that, where you could have introverts connecting where maybe they don't want to have a conversation right away. So like if you get to the networking event, you could go to the writing table where you could just do a little bit of work or do a little bit of drawing or do a little bit of reading before you actually started interacting with people to kind of like integrate yourself into the experience. What do you think about that?
I like that idea a lot. I mean, I like having this sort of retreat place within the networking space.
Yeah.
That I enjoy that a lot. I also one of the things you just said about you want to be, the thing about wanting to be interesting. I think the key is that you want to be interested.
Yes.
So one of the things is what can you do to promote interest in people. So I've been to events and it's corny, but where they have, instead of just having your name on a name tag, they have some like a fact about yourself. One of the things that I wanted to do, I had this great idea for a T-shirt company, and because you're going to have T-shirts that are custom made. So imagine you went to a networking event and every T-shirt had a different question that you had to slip on. So you all became a question that you
Ah,
had to ask somebody or they had to tell you about.
gotcha.
All of a sudden, so I guess they're called icebreakers,
Hmm.
But I think icebreakers that have meaning are interesting.
Yeah.
That they start the conversation starter and then they sort of level out. And I also think they have to be funny. So I also think one of the other things you can do is you can actually have it more of a sensory experience. So you can have like cool video going on that people can like connect to, or the soundtrack, the music soundtrack is really selected in a way, in maybe even in the soundtrack intersperse conversation that well, you tired of networking, folks? Now let's try this. Everybody, let's do the Macarena. I think dancing, actually, I think, can you imagine having a networking dancing event where everybody had to be dancing instead of just talking or
I
at
think
the same time?
it's important to have it kind of be like past the level of people's sort of wildest expectations, because I think there's a level at which, like, if you go to a networking event and they have maybe a name tag, and then your name tag has like a fact about you or something like that, people expect that. It's still like a step above the normal, like, traditional networking event, but it's not 10xing the idea. It's like, adding one to it, as opposed to being like a whole nother order. So I think that that element of surprise, and like good surprise, is kind of important to just kind of like knock people off their roost in a good way, not in like an awkward way or a stressful way, but just like a fun, playful way. Um, yeah, I think that idea is really cool. What are some of the other things that we thought really sucked about networking? So the speakers, how do you see, like, if there's a guest speaker or something like that, how do you see that being improved?
Well, usually what people do is they'll have networking, speaker, and then networking, right? So it's
Mm,
sort of this pattern. Everybody gets to know each other, and then they do that, the speaker, and then they have the a networking event after that. I sort of would like to switch that up. So you get there, and the first thing you do is you have a really good speaker who actually warms up the audience, which, by the way, may require an MC.
right.
I just was in Iceland at a burlesque show, and the MC was hysterical. I mean, he just kept on telling jokes. He introduced the speakers and stuff like that. We do it in the most boring of ways, but I'm just wondering if you don't divide things so much, that they become more
It's more fluid.
commingled.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody presents something and then everybody divides into groups, and stuff. So I sort of think of networking is a little bit different than a speaker thing. I mean, I honestly think we should just do a whole other podcast about the worst speaking things we've ever done. But networking for me is I'm going to go to an event, or at least part of an event, and I'm going to probably be standing up, and I'm going to be moving my body in between groups of people and smiling and somehow introducing myself or doing all that stuff. So the speaker part's a little bit different to me on
Okay,
that
so
one,
let's
Andrew.
separate that out. I think one thing that could really improve networking events is maybe like the actual layout of where people are expected to be. So, um, I've been to some networking events where you're kind of everyone's sitting like they're going to be watching a stand-up comedian or something like that, and it lends itself to this sort of like audience speaker dynamic. And I think that that sort of puts everyone into a passive mind state. And I really have liked like those. What was the guy's name? It was Joe something that does the sales meetings.
Marone.
Joe Marone.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, even though those were kind of like very traditional in some respects, I really liked the feeling of being in a circle, because it seemed to
Mm.
really provoke
Yep.
like conversation. So I think changing a networking event into more of like a almost like a book club feel could be kind of cool. And one other thing, I think it would be cool to actually workshop people's challenges or problems, like workshop the reasons that people were showing up to the networking event. So, like, for example, if someone is starting a business and they don't know how to market it, and they've kind of come here to meet people, but they don't know who to meet, like if you had this kind of round table type setup, or maybe that was part of, part of the events, you could say, okay, Sally really wants help with this. How can we, and then kind of like crowdsource how to solve her problem. I think that could be cool. What do you think of that?
I like that idea. I like I like doing that or theming it. You know, networking's not new
Sure.
at all. I think in the 1800s and 1700s, didn't they call them like soirees, where you would, and I'm probably really badly mispronouncing that.
Soiree? Like in the
Yeah,
French word
yeah,
for party?
where someone would open up their house and they would have all the artists would come there and they
Yeah.
would connect with one another. But one thing I think about networking events is they're often in cold places. Why not have as many of them in homes as possible?
Hmm.
I mean, when
Yeah.
you open up your home to people and you're like expanding your stuff and you say, could you bring 5 new people? The atmosphere is completely different, you know.
Interesting.
You know, so I think you're putting yourself more out there, and I think the conversations, again, it goes back to you're really hosting a party,
Right.
you know. So I mean, I think one thing would be to like to do it in home like locations, even if it's not your home, you know, like looking for that factor that makes things more comfortable with
Cozy.
people. I like
Yeah.
the round tables a lot. I agree with you completely that, you know, having people back in school just doesn't feel good to
Right.
most people. Nobody wants to go back there,
Yeah.
you know. So yeah, I like that idea.
What
Now,
else what else did we think sucked that we could solve in this part of it? Anything else we missed?
no, I think we talked about making them more real and that getting rid of that awkwardness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've talked a little bit about, you know, the sound thing.
We
Um,
talked about the I really in the problem stage we kind of talked about gathering some interesting facts about people so you know who they are ahead of time. I mean, I think that would really be helpful.
yeah,
Because I constantly find myself wanting to go to networking events and then not going at the last second because I can't figure out whether it would actually be worth it for me to
right.
go. And I don't want to drive all the way into the city if I don't know what types of people are going to be there and what it's going to be like. So maybe one last thing for this stage for me would be kind of like an agenda, not just what's going to happen, but like what's the purpose of each part of this networking event? Like, what are you going to get out of it? Because I'm not sure that I've ever seen a networking invitation where they tell you, what am I going to get out of this? They may have a great speaker or an interesting topic or something, but I don't know what it is that I'm going to get out of it, and I think that's probably the number one question on someone's mind.
Yeah, see, I disagree with you on that. I think the question of what you're going to get out of it is a question you have to ask yourself. You know, so for example, are you a kind of person who likes to go to an event and meet, like you're a taster? You like to meet as many people that you can and taste them, or are you you want to dive deep into the meal with 1 or 2 courses? So you're fine if you met 2 people and had deep conversations with them that would be extended, or do you want to like meet 15? Like, what's your strategy? What do you want to get out of it? Do you want to, like, you know, do you want to look for like minded people? So, other people who might be a web developer or in marketing, or are you looking for somebody? So, I think that you're the one who almost needs to do that, but it's really helpful if you know who's going to be there to set that. And I think if the networking event itself has a purpose, you know, so like, you know, I'm planning an event right now for a graduation of the Entrepreneurs Network.
Yeah.
And that's going to have, you know, probably 100 people there, and there's a networking component on it. That's really clear. It's a bunch of people who are all really focused on being entrepreneurs. At that event, my strategy would be to meet as many as possible
Yeah.
and then continue the conversation. It's different for me than going to maybe a networking event from the American Marketing Association where, man, I want to know three people there from medium sized companies who I can sell my services to.
Right.
Real different. So,
Yeah, so that's interesting that you say that. So let me rephrase my idea and not make it about telling people what they're going to get out of the event, but rather helping people prepare to have a great event. Because I do think that that's a problem because when I get an invitation to go to a networking event, I feel like I don't know how to be ready for it. And so if you send out like a little guide ahead of time, it's like, here's the things to think about to help you decide what you want to get out of this event so that everyone that comes is prepared, kind of has their own creative brief on what they want to happen. Because there's really nothing more awkward than a person who is severely confused about what they want, you know? If I show up at a networking event and I haven't figured out yet whether I want to talk to, like you're talking about, like whether I want to talk to 10 people or whether I want to have one really good connection, I think it's important to go into anything really with knowing what you'd like to get out of it. And that doesn't mean that that's going to be the only thing that you get out of it, or that you can't kind of change your mission if something really cool happens. But I think that giving people materials to help them figure out how to make themselves feel prepared would be good.
I like that a lot. You're almost so what happens is you get a bunch of logistical directions, be here at this time, bum bum bum, but to almost get a what our event has shaped up to be profile. We're right now expecting 40 people. 10 of them are in the arts, 20 of them work for nonprofits, bump, 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 and that. In general, most of them are going to be under 50, and we think that only 10% of them have good senses of humor. I mean, it would be really great to have
Yeah.
like some kind of little profile
Right.
on that. Because only 10% have a sense of humor, please limit your amount of jokes because they probably will fall flat. By the way, we've had 40 requests for gluten-free food, so they're probably picky.
Yeah.
I mean, who
Yeah,
you could get
I
a
love
great
that.
profile on that.
Yeah. All right. So let's just sum up some of the solutions that we've come up with. We just talked about helping prepare people so they come to the event really having a focus. We talked about having details and profiles on the people who are coming to the event so you kind of know what's going to be there. We talked about having some kind of space where maybe you can go either at the beginning of the event to like write or just do some kind of introverted activity, or maybe in the middle of the event if you're feeling a little burned out and you need to kind of like recharge or something like that. The acoustics being better so people can actually hear what they're talking about. We're going to save kind of the actual speaker stuff for another event. And then also just changing yourself. We talked about having a different attitude coming into it. What was the other one?
I liked your one a lot about having sort of a space set aside
Yeah.
where people could
What was the
connect.
other one that we talked about for changing yourself?
Well, one is to really want instead of trying to be
Oh
interesting,
yeah,
to
yeah,
be
yeah. Right.
interested,
Yeah.
and that I
Okay, I
think
think
is
that's
really.
huge. I mean, that's a great first step that someone could take right now, as opposed to having to create their own networking event or wait for someone to totally reinvent their local networking event. So that's all really good stuff. Let's shift into the logistics of how one might actually go about kind of reinventing the networking event and starting some kind of local periodic event that would be actually fun and not suck to go to. So let's just kind of like imagine if we were creating the perfect networking event in Rochester, what would be the first step that you would take in making that happen?
The first thing I would do is that I wouldn't create an event. Okay, so I'd like to go back to the soiree idea. I would find 6 friends who had big houses or not big houses, and I would ask them if they would be interested in hosting being a host of one of 6 themed ideas. One might be on arts in Rochester, and another one might be on being starting a business in Rochester. Another one might be on why are we one of the poorest and bad school places in the country,
Mm.
and that. Another one might be, a political one, more a topic so you could have people yelling at each other, which would be fun too. So a music thing, like different kinds of stuff
Yeah.
that would happen, and that what you asked 10 people to invite 3 of the most interesting people they know.
Mm.
So that would be the criteria, and then that would be this, and it would be not a networking thing, but really sort of an expand your tribe events.
Ooh,
You
I
know,
like that. I like that a lot. That's very interesting. So you have your friends, obviously maybe family members, if they were interested in that sort of thing. Um, I think like creating anything, I think it's important to kind of develop an audience first so you can kind of create the product with the audience as opposed to creating a product and then trying to hard sell it, to an audience. So I think maybe Facebook groups might be an interesting place to delve into. Where are some other places that you could meet people and kind of gauge their interest or get some ideas for starting a new type of event like that?
well, I mean, I've done that before, so I started a peer advisory group, which was called Great Dames. I've done those kind of groups. The issue, honestly, is not with starting; it's continuing.
Hmm, yeah.
Because really, what happens at a networking event is 2 things. One is you connect with people you haven't seen, who you like, and 2, you meet new people. I mean, those are the 2 criteria.
Hmm.
The connecting with people you haven't seen in a while is actually really important, and because you're finding out new stuff. Both of them are have their purpose, but in order to do that, you have to have serious. So you have to have people who take responsibility. So there are events like dine around meets. There are meetup groups. There's very active meetup groups. So there are structures that let you do this pretty easily. You just sort of have to have the energy to do that. And then I think you have to keep it really focused, because it's really easy to go off track
Right.
and all of a sudden it becomes something else. So, what is your real purpose? If your real purpose is you want to really expand your tribe and develop real relationships, then it makes you do a certain kind of networking. If you don't really care about developing real relationships and you just want to know more people,
Yeah.
then it's a different kind of event.
Right.
So I think you gotta, you know,
So,
and by the way, I think that's one of the reasons you and I don't like networking events, is because we tend to like going deep.
yeah.
And networking events almost by definition don't do that.
Well, yeah. I mean, the feeling that I get when I go to a lot of networking events is that we're all doing what we think that we should be doing, but we're not actually getting anything really deep out of it. We're getting like the feeling that we're doing the right thing, but we're not actually doing something. It's like, do you get that feeling?
Well, I don't do well in things that don't have substance.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, and this is always, I mean, I remember my first job, a guy who was really, really social, and he was observing me at a networking event, and he said, Kathy, you just don't know how to talk about the weather, do you? And because I was like, so, hi, George, what is the meaning of life?
Yeah.
You know, I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, yeah.
I don't do weather very well.
Yeah.
So I think maybe what we're doing is not talking about reinventing a networking event, but the question is, the deeper one is in our world right now, how do you quickly make substantial in-person, not only virtual relationships in your community with diverse groups of people, and what is the best way of doing that
Yeah.
without exhausting yourself?
Right.
You know, and so how do you do that?
Yeah. Well, so one thing you talked about is responsibility. And I mean, my mom leads a hiking group, and she has had the hardest time trying to get people to take over leading the hikes because most people just want to be led. So what do you I mean, I think that's probably the place where most groups break down is because one person can't handle, the constant responsibility of doing this, every week or every month. And so they need someone else to take over, but they can't get people to take over consistently. So what do you see as maybe the way to help encourage people to want to take on responsibility and become a leader?
I don't know if you can really do that. So I think the question is that if you create these kind of things, should you be compensated? You
Okay.
know, so if what you want to do, well, I think there are different ways. So for example, when I had my Great Dames group here, one of the things I did is I had people bring food.
Yeah.
I had other people bring food, so I didn't take on that part. I didn't take on cleaning up afterwards. Everybody joined in. So when people were here, they actually did things and brought stuff, and they felt like part of it.
Oh,
So I think
interesting.
one
Okay.
thing is to make it sort of like a joint potluck kind of thing where you're not making it that complicated,
Gotcha.
and that
So you're kind of delegating out a lot of the
you
responsibility to so people aren't so burdened by feeling like they have to take on this huge leader responsibility, but at the same time you're kind of offloading a lot of the things
right.
that make you stressed or make you that you just don't have time for,
Yeah,
etc.
I mean, so like for example, if your mom divided the task and what she was doing and said, you know, Cindy, I'd like you to plan the route. You know, George, I'd like you to send out an evite. You
Sure.
know,
Yeah.
so and so, can you pack some snacks?
Yeah.
You know, whatever it is, people will generally not say no to that. What
The
they
little
don't
small
want
manageable
is,
task.
yeah, the
Yeah.
organization of it.
Yeah, so if we're talking organization, I can't help but bring up. There's an app called Notion, which I'm gonna have to show you someday. But I will. I could sit here and talk about this for hours. But it's kind of like if you imagine Wikipedia just being for you, and you can create all of these pages that link to different things. And I think it's a great way to stay organized. So if you're gonna do something like this, doesn't have to be Notion, but you do have to have, I think, some sort of system or some way of keeping yourself organized with who's doing what, and it needs to be simple enough that you're not going to lose your mind. Because if you're trying to use 50 different tools to track something as complicated as doing an event, you're probably going to go crazy and you're probably going to quit. So I think the organizational aspect is important. Let's talk about venues. So I think homes are a really good place, like we said. Are there any other places that would feel or would have a better acoustics or be better laid out than your typical like bar setting that you can think of?
Um, I think coffee houses are good. I think
Okay.
in Rochester, you know, picnic shelters are fun. You know, I mean, I
Yeah,
haven't been
true.
to one of
Yeah, the
those in
outdoor.
a long time, or even
Have you ever
in
been
the,
to an outdoor networking event?
no.
Yeah, me neither.
And I think it'd be great, or like having, like in the winter here, having, you know, there are great cabins around and they'd have fireplaces and
Yeah.
like having that kind of stuff where it's you're getting away and then you can go off. What you were talking about before of having a room will make the outside your room. You can go off on a hike with somebody you met at
Sure.
the
Yeah.
networking event. I think those would be fun. I think they're fun to connect a networking event to another thing, like having what if you can get a space in a room at Strong Museum of Play where people can network and then they can go play or go to a
Yeah.
baseball game or go meet at the zoo. And I mean, just where you're going for fun and connection.
Yeah.
So I think there are lots of, I mean, meet at the art gallery at the restaurant and then go for a tour of the art gallery. I mean, so I think many venues in Rochester. The question really is more the expense.
Sure.
So can you find a place that will pay for that? And like so as I have a restaurant.
Yeah.
People want to have a networking event. We generally don't charge for the space at Down Squares because we're going to make the money in
Right.
pizza and
Yeah.
alcohol.
Okay.
Other places do charge, so you gotta weigh that one in
So
more.
if you are trying to do it at a place like a coffee shop, where the venue could potentially make money, how the first time you're doing it, let's say you don't really know how many people are going to show up because it's the first time. Maybe you have a list that says, okay, 20 people are going to show up, but you're not sure. How would you go about talking to the venue? I mean, obviously, you need them to reserve a little bit of space so people aren't just completely crowded out if you actually have, 20 people show up. But how do you have that conversation? Have you ever talked to a venue about doing a first event?
Oh, tons of times. So usually, part of it's, by the way, connected to whether you charge for the event.
Uh-huh.
So if you're going to have a free event, or even like a charge of $5 or $10, and 50 people say they're going to attend, you can essentially take it down to 30 may show up.
Okay.
Okay,
So maybe
so
50%.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, you're going to have a big drop
Yeah.
on that, particularly if it's free. I mean, I don't think I've ever been an event where too many people showed up. And if it did, then it feels hip and popular, so you
Sure.
don't
Yeah.
really care.
Yeah.
I mean, the worst nightmare is, oh my God, what if I have an event and only 3 people show?
Right.
And that. So I think when you talk to the place, you know how many people you're inviting
Right.
on that. I think you do have to invite. I mean, I don't think you can just throw out to the universe, we're having a networking event, whoever wants to show up, show up.
Yeah.
Right. So you have to have some numbers, and then you give the venue, a smaller number
Gotcha.
on that. So that's how you would plan the first one.
Okay. So I think we've gone through a lot of good stuff. I kind of have a pretty clear picture of how I would go about starting to do this if I wanted to reinvent the networking event. And, I'm pretty interested in doing something like creativity and business related. So I'm going to explore this. I also want to, for anyone that's listening, I want to kind of put out a challenge to either start thinking about how to reinvent yourself going to networking events that already exist using some of the things we've talked about. I mean, first and foremost, stop trying to be interesting and start trying to be interested. I think that that's absolutely huge. And then two, if you don't have a lot of networking events that are really interesting to you in your town or your city, start thinking about how you could reinvent the networking event for people that you know. I mean, create an audience, figure out what would be interesting to them, and then kind of start going hard at that. And if people are kind of taking on these challenges, either personal or starting their own event, I'd love to hear about it. And I know you, Kathy, would love to hear about it too. So you can get in touch with me at F the Lines on Twitter. And where can people reach out to you, Kathy?
I actually like email. I'm a little old school, so
Okay.
it's Kathy with a K at gofirestarter.com. Just think of the book, gofirestarter.com.
Yes. So this has been a great conversation. I am happy to have my new co-host Kathy Palikoff with me. She is the author of the fascinating book Fire Starters, which you can find on Amazon. Anything else you'd like to add, Kathy, before we say goodbye?
I just want to add that I have a great idea for our next one,
Oh, okay. What's
which
it gonna
I
be?
think we should talk about how to reinvent the follow up from networking
Ah,
events.
yes. I
Okay?
love it. Okay, so stay tuned for that. We're going to be working on that, and I'll keep you guys updated on Twitter. And until then, keep fucking with the lines.
And be a fire starter.
See you guys.